Zeus married his sisters. The gods threw actual tantrums. Medusa was cursed for something that wasn't even her fault. For generations, classicists treated Greek mythology as pure fantasy, stories invented to explain lightning and thunder. Then archaeologists started excavating. Scholars re-examined ancient texts and historians looked at cultural context. Turns out the Greeks were describing real people, real places, and real misunderstandings. We just weren't listening carefully enough. These are 5 things you think you know about Greek mythology that are completely wrong. 1. Centaurs weren't supernatural hybrids at all. And honestly, this one is kind of embarrassing for ancient Greece. Centaurs were the Greeks' way of describing something they'd never seen before. When the Greeks first encountered mounted warriors, particularly Scythian horsemen from the steppes, they genuinely didn't have a cultural reference for people who seemed to be half human, half horse. These nomadic riders were inseparable from their horses, spending entire lives in the saddle, fighting from horseback with spears and bows. To observers who'd only ever seen soldiers on foot, a skilled rider and horse looked like a single creature. Think about it. You're a Greek farmer who's never seen a horse before, and suddenly this thing appears that's literally part human, part animal. It took time and actual contact for Greeks to understand that humans actually belonged on top of horses, not fused with them. The centaur wasn't a monster. It was a cultural misunderstanding that got locked into mythology and stayed there forever. Even today, we call skilled riders centaur-like, not realizing we're still using ancient propaganda about a confused first contact. 2. The oracle at Delphi wasn't insane or making things up. For centuries, scholars assumed the oracle of Delphi was either a fraud or genuinely crazy, spouting random gibberish that priests then interpreted into prophecies. But geological surveys of the Delphi site revealed something fascinating. The temple sits directly above underground chambers where toxic gases, specifically ethylene, leak from the earth. When the oracle sat in her sacred chamber above these fissures, she would inhale these gases and literally become intoxicated. The trance state, the wild utterances, the seeming madness, it was all drug-induced. The oracle wasn't faking prophecy. She was experiencing real neurological effects from volcanic emissions. Ancient Greeks built their entire system of divination around a woman who was chemically altered by her environment. The most famous oracle in history was just extremely high. 3. The Minotaurs' labyrinth actually existed, though not quite how the myth describes it. The palace at Knossos on Crete was enormous, sprawling, complicated enough that visitors would genuinely need a map to navigate it. Built around 1700 BC, it was the heart of Minoan civilization, and it was weird by any standard. The palace had maze-like corridors, hidden chambers, intricate layouts, and rooms that seemed designed for obscure rituals. When Greeks encountered these ruins centuries later, they created stories to explain the strange architecture. A monster in a labyrinth? That was their way of making sense of an ancient palace designed by people they didn't understand anymore. The Minotaur wasn't real, but the labyrinth was. The Greeks saw complex architecture and created a monster to explain why it was so confusing. Sometimes mythology is just confusion about history. Scots. 4. Medusa wasn't born a monster in the way you've been told. Most versions of Medusa's story describe her transformation as punishment, but Medusa represents something deeper about how societies treated women who were different or threatening. The Gorgon mythology likely drew inspiration from real cultural practices in real women who were demonized. Snake imagery was common in ancient goddess worship and fertility cults, particularly in pre-Greek Mediterranean religions. When Greek culture absorbed older traditions from Minoan and other cultures, powerful women with serpent associations became monsters in their stories. Medusa's curse was the Greeks converting an older religious tradition into something evil. She wasn't a victim of transformation. She was a victim of cultural conquest. Her snakes and her power and her danger got rewritten as a monster's affliction instead of a priestess's authority. The myth tells you more about Greek anxieties than about any actual person or creature. 5. Greek heroes weren't invented from imagination. Many were based on real historical figures or conflations of multiple real people whose names got lost in translation and time. Heracles might have been inspired by a real man of exceptional strength, who performed exploits in real places. The stories accumulated, merged, and transformed across centuries of retelling until superhuman features got added. Achilles, Hector, Perseus. They might have been partly real warriors whose actual deeds were so remarkable that legends formed around them. The Greeks had a tendency to mythologize their own history, turning important events into stories with divine intervention and monsters. The line between history and mythology in ancient Greece wasn't as clear as we think when you read about Greek heroes today. You're reading partially accurate historical records filtered through the lens of storytelling and religious belief. The Greeks didn't invent heroes from nothing. They invented legends around people who actually existed, just with more gods involved. For centuries, scholars dismissed Greek mythology as pure imagination, primitive attempts to understand the world before science existed. But archaeology keeps proving that the Greeks were describing real things. Mounted warriors really did seem like half-human creatures. The oracle really was intoxicated by geological forces. The labyrinth really was a confusing ancient palace. Medusa was part of a real religious tradition being rewritten, and heroes really were real people whose stories grew until nobody remembered the original humans anymore. The myths weren't lies. They were how ancient people made sense of their world. So here's a question that might reframe how you see mythology. How many stories do we tell today about our own world that future archaeologists will have to dig up and correct? What are we getting wrong about our current events that will sound as strange as Greek myths 2,000 years from now? Think about that. Subscribe for more history that sounds too strange to be real.